After our reviews of the RX 580 2048 Cute Pet featuring Snowflake heavily and the 5700 XT Waifu edition, we thought it was probably time to venture outside of video cards from AliExpress and try some coolers. We purchased the ID Cooling Pinkflow, a pink and white closed loop liquid cooler that sells for around $100, which is close to most of the other 240 CLCs on the market for price. ID Cooling is headquartered in Shenzhen, where we've seen its products dominating shelves at Huaqiangbei SEG, and it even lists its factory as Shenzhen Wanjinhua Technology. What we're uncertain of is if ID Cooling owns the factory or just partners with it, but we'd assume the latter. ID Cooling is a legitimate cooling manufacturer, and it's pretty big in Asia, often standing prominently alongside Cooler Master at the markets as one of the only cooling providers that we see in the stalls. They don't have much Western reach though. We bought the ID Cooling Pinkflow to see how it does, as we assume buyers of the Cute Pet or the Waifu might want some other parts to match their build. Waifus do need company after all. Before that, this video is brought to you by Thermaltake's Tough RAM RGB memory, available from 3000 MHz up to 4400 MHz in 8GB by 2 configurations. The Thermaltake Tough RAM uses 10 addressable RGB LEDs for bright illumination and comes in both black and white kits of memory. Learn more at the link in the description below. So this is what we're reviewing today. This is the ID Cooling 240mm Pinkflow. It's got a name that sounds like a euphemism for a biological function and the charm of being, well, just different and unique. Now, although ID Cooling hasn't made a Pinkflow cooler body pillow yet, certainly that's on the list of products to make because the stuff we've been finding on AliExpress lately really seems to have a specific theme, and there's a lot of white and pink going on. We thought it'd be a fun one to look at, and we've seen it in some builds even online lately. Overall, this cooler is pretty standard. It's a 240mm CLC. It's got obviously two 120mm fans on it. The radiator is familiar to anyone who's bought an Asetek made cooler in the past, and Asetek does make most of them right now for the consumer market. That'd be a lot of Corsair stuff, EVGAs, all of them, and a lot of all of NZXTs currently. So it's familiar hardware. It's just that they've made it pink and white. At $100, it's pretty comparable to other 240s. The EVGA CLC 240 at time of writing was $104. That's one of the more budget-friendly ones. Corsair still has some of its H100 series coolers out there for a bit overpriced at $125 or so, and then this comes in just below that. So this thing, we've got thermal tests on it, of course. We have noise tests. We've done noise normalized thermal testing. We've added a new chart for closed loop liquid cooler reviews, but we're also going to do something a bit different and break rank and talk about the overall build quality and looks of the cooler outside of just the functional performance angle of things, because it is so clearly looks focused for, I mean, that's why you buy it. Otherwise you just buy literally any other 240 CLC. They're all mostly the same anyway. So let's talk about the build quality and the appearances, get into thermals, and then figure out if this thing's worth buying. Although the Pinkflow has several blemishes, it has managed to impress us overall. We expected a lot worse, but from a CLC standpoint, this one's been pretty standard. The radiator is painted white, and the white on the radiator actually isn't that bad. It's done all the way through, so even the insides of the fins are white. Sometimes we see coolers that miss this and end up with black marks, or maybe you see exposed copper or aluminum, whatever the material may be. In this case, it's aluminum. We'd assume that ID Cooling's partner factory is painting them before creating the crinkles in the fins, as that'd make the most sense. White is notoriously hard as a color to do for computer hardware and often has issues matching between materials on the same part. The fan frames are probably the most obvious instance of this, an area of trouble, where we can clearly see the mold marks halfway down the fan and some of the underlying plastic coming up. The fan frame coloring is more of an off-white and almost looks a little dusty, not quite matching up with the powder white on the radiator. The rest of the frame is comprised of a clear diffuser for the LEDs, but the diffuser is partially covered by a simple paper pink sticker in the middle. Speaking of stickers, the radiator also has a few large foil stickers on either side, and ours was slightly peeling at the top when we got it, but we pressed it back down firmly and it's stayed in place since. But this area may be an area that you have to keep an eye on, and you might need to get the glue out for it in a year or so. The tubes are also white and braided, but ours have had black scuff marks on them since we got the unit. The marks don't seem to come out easily, so this could be a downside for pickier users. You might be able to apply some cleaning product to scrub it off. We didn't really try that hard. The tubes, though, are a standard Asetek style rubber underneath for the tubing, meaning that they bypass the Teflon inner lining that companies like Cooler Master use and instead stick to a simpler rubber. Teflon lining is useful for reducing permeation of the tubes with age, but it's also significantly less flexible, and it has the downside that if you bend it too far, it'll crack, at which point you effectively have a leak or at least very bad permeation. We generally prefer the rubber solution found on this one, as it's more flexible and less prone to error, despite a standard 5 to 6 year life expectancy prior to permeation really starting to matter. As an upside though, the pink fan blades are free of blemishes and look just like the Pepto-Bismol color that's advertised on the box. We stuck a reflective sticker on them to validate the fan RPM with a laser tachometer, just to make sure the fan wasn't lying to us, and they do come back to about 2130 RPM, plus or minus the usual 10%. One of them is about 100 RPM slower. The pump block housing is a cheaper feeling plastic that's fingerprint prone and coated with a chromed pink color. Not at all accurately represented by the box's more silver representation, but the chromed pink is definitely way more appropriate for the cooler. The mounting plate is a somewhat standard Asetek style plate that latches with good granularity, so you can angle the cooler mount as desired, and it should feel like every Asetek CLC on the market. The pump plate isn't rotatable though, so you only have one way to get that right side up without taking it apart and modifying it. We're starting to see this change. We have some footage from CES 2020 when we visited Lian Li, where the company had its maybe second or third iteration of its Galahad AIO or CLC, and in that one there's a rotatable pump block so that you can change the logo orientation, and this is something that companies are finally starting to catch on to, but not on the Pinkflow. A small annoyance is that the pump block has two cables jutting out of it, the pump power, obviously, and then an RGB header with two active pins. The RGB cable ends up sort of ugly, but there aren't many other options for synchronization with RGB LEDs aside from cables protruding out of the block. Normally we don't really care about aesthetics in general for products, and typically I personally prefer to have the cables the actual color so I know which one's 12 volts or 5 volts or whatever it may be. In this instance, the product is so focused on looks that we almost wonder if it'd look better with white cabling instead, or at least all black without the brown wire running down the RGB cable, but normally we don't really care that much. This cooler claims on the box to be compatible with AuraSync, MSI Mystic Light, and Gigabyte RGB Fusion, but we don't like intentionally installing malware on our test benches, so we didn't try any of these applications with it. There's not much reason it wouldn't work, it's just a pass-through, and this is fairly standard pinning. Installation is trivial, it's often the case with liquid coolers, and this one is just a matter of a few standoffs and a couple of screw caps on top of them. Desktop platforms use an additional backplate, all included in the box, and ID Cooling even includes some rubber bumpers that theoretically help with vibration damping for the fans, but more realistically, they're just there for the looks. The biggest downside overall is that the fans look plasticky and cheap from the frame, and that the white colors are slightly different between the tubes, the radiator, the barbs that the tubes connect to, and the other embellishments. Once inside of a darker chassis, you probably won't be able to tell that much though, but it is kind of a nitpick. We should get into the thermal and noise data next. For this, we're using our standard CLC cooler testing methodology that we've used for years now. We'll start with 40 dBA noise normalized thermals to establish a baseline for efficiency, since any cooler can brute force its way to the top of the charts just by running louder fans. That's not impressive. It's when they run the same conditions as each other and then still manage to win that we end up impressed. So we'll start with 40 dBA noise normalized. Our upcoming chart is a new one for our closed loop liquid cooler benchmark, for which we've maintained a database for 3 years now. We refactored all of our old results just for this review to create a new metric. Our original metric was a weighting that included the soak time of a cooler, allowing us to analyze how efficiently a liquid cooler would perform when soaking heat load fluctuations throughout the course of the test. This new data set uses some results for a torture only load at steady state. It's all at steady state for the most part, but the soak difference is that we're also looking at the dips when it goes down to a more medium load and then comes back up. So how does it deal with that? And the larger radiators are obviously benefited in those tests. So this eliminates some of the medium load soak period, and it looks only at torture. It somewhat minimizes the effect of radiator size compared to the other chart, but it's easier to work with for a straight data comparison under heavy load. For this data set, the ID Cooling Pinkflow 240 ends up at about 45.6 degrees Celsius delta T over ambient for average CPU core temperature, as averaged across all of the cores and across all the steady state data in the spreadsheet, so it's a lot of rows of data averaged. The Pinkflow manages to roughly tie with the Corsair H100i Pro, an older staple, but still available at $125 online. The Pinkflow comes in $20 cheaper, it's pink and white, and it's about the same level of performance when noise normalized to 40 dBA at 20 inches. Differences, though, will emerge at 100% fan speeds. The Pinkflow has louder fans on average RPM for RPM than Corsair's H100i Pro, illustrated by the RPM delta at the same noise level. But there's also some pump noise there too. It roughly matches in performance though. The 280mm Be Quiet silent loop runs at 44.9 degrees Celsius over ambient with this metric, making it roughly within error of the H100i Pro. But we were never too impressed with the silent loop, and it also can't legally be sold in the US anyway, so it doesn't really matter that much. The CLC 240 jumps further ahead at 44 degrees, but it's still nearing error and test-to-test variants. The Pinkflow only outperforms weird liquid coolers, like the PC cooler, which doesn't count, and 120mm CLCs like the M22, which was garbage. That said, it's not doing poorly, it's just not the best. For the more standard chart that includes time to soak the thermal peaks, temperatures overall decline by a couple of degrees on average, typically about 2 degrees Celsius, but some coolers see wider swings. The 120mm CLCs see the biggest reduction, as they don't have enough volume to adequately absorb the torture-only load. The Pinkflow 240 ends up technically ahead of the H100i V2, and technically about tied with the H100i Pro. But that doesn't mean that these are any different from each other. These three coolers are within test variants run to run, and so we can call them functionally equivalent. The 41.8 degree Pinkflow result has it also near the H115i Pro at 37 dBA, at 39 degrees over ambient, but note that the H115i Pro's fans don't reach our 40 dBA noise normalized number, and so it would perform better if it could be properly normalized to the rest of the chart. The Pinkflow cooler is reasonably competitive with its nearby 240mm peers. If you specifically wanted a pink and white cooler, and assuming this one has the look that you want, its performance really isn't meaningfully impactful enough to negate the sale, if that's what you want. It's not like it's bad, it's just you don't buy it for the performance, clearly. Endurance, of course, we're uncertain of at this time, but the performance is fine. This chart ignores noise levels and allows coolers to operate at their maximum fan RPM, which can blow out the scale for some devices. The EVGA CLC 360, for instance, may be a chart topper, but it's also about 60 dBA at 20 inches away. It's a jet engine, and it's totally intolerable at these speeds, but it does technically have the best performance as a result. We'll look at the 100% speed noise levels momentarily. The Pinkflow 240 and its 100% fan speed places overall worse when compared to the other 240mm coolers like the NDC X52 at 2100 RPM and 37 degrees, or the H100i V2 at 2500 RPM and 36 degrees Celsius over ambient. The Pinkflow, though, is much quieter than the H100i V2 at 2130 RPM. Of course, that's because the RPM is lower, and it ranks at 39 degrees over ambient. This puts it closer to a slowed down H115i Pro when you intentionally slow it down, and this also illustrates that the benefit of those larger coolers is pretty clear. The 280mm CLCs can achieve what the 240mm CLCs can while running significantly lower RPM and thus lower noise levels, so that's your benefit. To relate the previous data back to noise levels, here's a chart with the Pinkflow at full speed for noise. The cooler measures at 47.4 dBA at 20 inches when tested acoustically at its 2100-ish RPM, depending on which fan you're looking at. The two fans have a variance of about 100 RPM between them, and this is normal. And that puts the Pinkflow closer to the Kraken X62 and Silent Loop 280 in noise performance, mostly because it's not running as fast as other 240mm CLCs. The H100i V2, for instance, maxes out at 53.9 dBA and 2500 RPM, and the CLC 240 by EVGA runs at about 58 dBA. The Pinkflow is much quieter than these, but also has lower performance headroom. Ultimately, we'd recommend a manual fan profile for any of these coolers anyway, so the noise at 100% isn't all too relevant other than to illustrate where they can top out for performance as matched against noise, but there's an obvious trade-off. Overall then, how'd it do? Well, it's actually not bad. It seems mostly fine. For thermals and noise, this is very much a, oh nice, it's got good stand-up ability too. This is very much one of those situations where it's, well, buy it if that's what you want, because there's nothing offensively bad in terms of performance, and if you want a pink and white cooler, as far as I'm aware, there aren't any other ones, at least that are CLCs. If you know of them, please link them below, tweet at us, whatever, and we'll check them out. But if you don't want pink and white, don't buy it. It's not like it does better for you in cooling, and if you do want it, then, well, it's fine. So one thing I did just notice a second ago was a couple more blemishes on this thing that I wanted to point out. So it seems like the company, ID or ID Cooling, has a lot of fit and finish issues overall. We addressed a lot of those in the build section, but there's some more here. So first of all, on the top of this fan, there are scuffs and blemishes in the pink sticker. It's just a paper sticker where you can see the paper underneath it, so there's some off-white showing through. Same for the one on the bottom. There's a big streak where it looks like a screwdriver was dragged on it. That wasn't us. And then this lower fan in the current orientation, I just noticed this, has a couple of dings on it. And that was one of the things I said in the script actually came out better, but I was wrong. This one does have some gray marks in it along the pink edge of the fan blades. Now, all of these things are pretty minor overall. It's kind of nitpicky, but that's what we do, especially on the case reviews, and I took some of that formatting for this one. One thing I will say is that the Pinkflow 240 matches up with our other boxes quite well. And now we've got a pretty full collection. There's a couple more things I am aware of and I'm trying to get. We've got a pretty full collection of weird stuff from AliExpress or Tmall or actually being in Shenzhen. And this can now join the ranks. Much like these, it's fine. It's a buy it if that's what you want. That's more or less it. So that's it for this one. Thanks for watching. As always, subscribe for more. If you want to support us in paying for things like this, you can go to patreon.com/gamersnexus and help us out there for behind the scenes videos as well. If you think that's stupid and you don't want to fund this, you can instead go to store.gamersnexus.net and buy something for yourself. And then we'll use that money to buy stuff like this. So thanks for watching. Subscribe for more. We'll see you all next time.